I never expected the moment my life cracked open would begin with an innocent tap on my banking app. 1 second, I was lying in bed trying to ease the pounding ache behind my eyes, and the next, I was staring at a number so wrong my brain refused to register it. $17 and some scattered cents. That was all that remained of the neurosurgery fund I had spent nearly 2 years building. 2 years of extra freelance work. 2 years of telling myself my arteriovenous malformation wasn't a ticking bomb if I just kept moving forward. 2 years believing Evan, my husband, was helping me survive this. I refreshed the page once, twice, a third time. The balance didn't change. Then I scrolled through the transaction history, and my stomach turned so violently I had to sit up. Charges to Key Paradise Holdings, a villa booking, a private charter, a 2-passenger reservation at a luxury waterside resort in Key Largo, all authorized by the only other person with access, Evan. I called him immediately, fingers trembling. He didn't answer. I called again, and this time he picked up with an annoyed sigh, as if I'd interrupted something trivial. "Don't panic, Grace," he said. "This trip is important. You'll be fine. You always exaggerate." "My surgery money," I choked. "Evan, that fund is gone." A beat of silence, then a low exhale. "Grace, you're dragging everyone down with your constant health drama. Maybe it's better if you stop fighting and accept things." My vision shimmered with black flecks. I felt the familiar tightening at the base of my skull, the warning sign Dr. Rowan had told me never to ignore. But all I heard was Evan's voice, cool and dismissive. Better if I stopped fighting. In that moment, something inside me went still. If my husband thought I was better off dead, then he had no idea who he had just created. I pushed myself off the couch, steadying my breath. The ache behind my eyes felt like a blade stirring inside my skull, but I forced my mind into clarity. I needed to understand how deep the lie went, how long Evan had been building a world where I no longer existed as a person, just an obstacle. I opened our old digital folders, searching for the tax documents he insisted on controlling. He always said finances stressed me out, especially with my symptoms. I believed him. I let him handle everything. He convinced me that letting go was easier, safer. But as I flipped through overdue medical bills, he swore he'd paid, and rejected insurance claims he'd blamed on clerical issues. A new picture emerged. One where Evan wasn't overwhelmed by my illness. He was cultivating it, feeding a narrative where I was fragile, confused, irresponsible. I remembered the first time he'd said it in front of someone else. At a company barbecue last fall, he wrapped an arm around me and told a coworker, "Grace tries so hard. Her head injury makes things unpredictable." He said it with a soft smile, like he was protecting me. Later he joked, "If anything ever happens to you, at least my debts go away." He laughed. I didn't. Looking back, every moment had been a breadcrumb, and I had ignored all of them. My phone buzzed, a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. "Hi, Grace. I wanted to check if you're still in the outpatient psychiatric program. Evan said, well, just checking." My heart stopped. Psychiatric program? I dialed the number back. A woman named Melanie answered, her voice tight with embarrassment when she realized Evan had lied. "He told a lot of people you'd been struggling mentally since the injury," she whispered. "Said he was doing everything he could to keep you stable. I'm so sorry, I didn't know what was true." Stable, fragile, unpredictable. That's how he introduced me to the world. The more I dug, the more rot I found. Evan had been shaping me into a woman no one would believe. Someone too confused to question him, too overwhelmed to manage her own accounts, too sick to notice if her husband drained every resource meant to keep her alive. Then came the detail that made my skin crawl. A payment reminder for a debt I had never opened appeared on my notifications. A personal loan under my name. I rubbed my thumb against the screen, hoping it was some technical error, but the account existed, and it had been delinquent for 2 cycles. His forgery mimicked my signature almost perfectly. Almost. except for a flourish at the end. The flourish he used when signing birthday cards. I sank into the dining chair, a tremor running through me. The walls felt too quiet, too close. The security camera Evan installed for my safety blinked in the corner. I pulled up the footage on my phone. Nights when Evan claimed he slept beside me, he was walking out the front door. Nights he pretended he was working late, he returned home in different clothes. One clip even showed him talking to a shadowed figure at the doorway. I couldn't make out the face. As I scrolled, my phone buzzed again, this time with a text from an unknown number. "Are you safe? Leave the house before he returns." My skin prickled. My pulse spiked. Someone else knew. Someone who wasn't Evan. I looked around the house. The perfect living room arranged exactly as Evan liked it. Clean, controlled, curated. A museum of a life that was never really mine. I opened his desk drawer, looking for any remaining financial documents. Beneath a stack of envelopes was one with my name written in his hand. Inside was a printed psychological evaluation diagnosing me as cognitively impaired, emotionally unstable, and unfit to manage personal affairs. I had never been evaluated. He had fabricated an entire mental breakdown for me. My hands shook, but my voice did not when I whispered into the empty room. He wasn't planning to leave me. He was planning to erase me. And now, I had no choice but to learn exactly how far he'd already gone. The morning after everything unraveled, I woke on my father's couch with the taste of metal in my mouth and a pressure behind my eyes that felt like someone tightening a vice around my skull. I hadn't slept. I'd drifted in and out, jolting awake each time my mind replayed Evan's voice telling me I exaggerated my illness, that I was dragging everyone down. Light poured through the living room windows, and for a moment I just sat there holding my breath, wondering how many years I had lived inside a version of myself he had crafted for everyone else to see. My phone buzzed, a voicemail from an unknown number. I played it, expecting maybe a bill collector or a wrong number. Instead, a cautious female voice said, "Hi, Grace. Are you still in the outpatient psychiatric program?" Evan said, "Well, just checking." The message ended abruptly, leaving a ringing in my ears louder than my heartbeat. Psychiatric program? He had told people I was unstable. Not just one or two people, enough that someone felt comfortable calling to check on me as if I were a stranger's case file. I called back, hands trembling. The woman, Melanie, froze the moment she realized who I was. She sounded embarrassed. "Oh my God, Grace, I'm so sorry. I thought you knew. Evan said you'd had a setback since the head injury. He said you were overwhelmed and didn't like to talk about it." Overwhelmed, fragile, unpredictable. I'd heard those words before. Evan had sprinkled them into conversations like seasoning, gentle enough that I never noticed the flavor changing. Now, hearing them thrown back at me by someone who believed them completely, I felt a cold shudder run down my spine. When I hung up, memories began reshaping themselves in my mind, moments that once felt harmless suddenly taking on new shadows. Friends who stopped inviting me places because Evan told them noise triggered my episodes. Co-workers who seemed overly patient with me, as if afraid I might break under pressure. His mother's soft, pitying voice saying, "Evan cares so much for you, dear." I'd thought it was kindness. Now I knew it was conditioning. I remembered a company barbecue last summer. I was standing beside Evan when one of his colleagues asked how I was feeling after a stressful deadline. Evan slid an arm around me and said, "She tries her best. Since the head injury, we have good days and bad ones." He squeezed me gently, smiling like a supportive husband. At the time, I laughed it off. But beneath the gesture was a script he'd been rehearsing for years. My throat tightened with a mix of anger and humiliation. I opened his laptop again, proving to myself I hadn't imagined yesterday's discoveries. The browser auto-filled into financial portals, insurance claims, emails I had never seen. I dug into the older files and found medical bills stamped late, rejection notices he swore were resolved, and messages he'd deleted claiming I'd missed appointments because of confusion. Confusion, that must have been his favorite word. Something inside me clicked. Beneath Evan's calm demeanor, there had always been a subtle force, pushing, shaping, trimming edges of my life like I was a bonsai tree he needed to keep small. I opened the insurance portal he claimed didn't exist. My stomach knotted. Several claims were legitimate, but just as many were falsified. Procedures I never had, treatments I never received. Some had been flagged for suspicious documentation. This wasn't negligence. It was strategy. A text notification flashed across my screen. Unknown number. Are you safe? Leave the house before he returns. My heart slammed into my ribs. I looked at the window automatically, half expecting to see a silhouette watching from the yard. Nothing, but someone knew more than they should. Someone who wasn't Evan. I ignored the dizziness creeping into my vision and kept digging. I opened the credit report Evan handled every year. Lines of debt I never signed for, a personal loan in my name, months overdue. Enough to destroy my credit and leave me dependent. The signature on the application looked like mine. But there it was, the flourish, the little extra flick he used when signing greeting cards. A perfect imitation except for the arrogance. My breath shook. My eyes stung, not from tears but from the final collapse of denial. I needed to tell someone. My father? He'd never understood the nuances of Evan's charm, the way Evan could make concern look like devotion. My friends? Most had drifted away. I had assumed life simply pulled us apart. Now I wasn't so sure. I dialed Evan's mother. She answered on the second ring. "Oh, Grace," she said, her voice dipped in syrup. "Are you feeling better today? Evan told us not to overwhelm you." I froze. Overwhelm me? "Yes, darling. He said your state has been delicate. We're trying not to interfere." State. Delicate. Interfere. Every word tightened around me like rope. "I need to ask something," I said, my voice thinning. "Did you sign anything for Evan recently? Anything about me?" Her breath hitched. She lowered her voice. "I didn't sign anything. But Curtis, he said he would help Evan with the paperwork." Curtis. My cousin. The one I hadn't spoken to in years. Someone murmured behind her. She whispered quickly, "She's asking questions. Tell Evan." Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone, pulse pounding in my temples. Evan hadn't only crafted a narrative. He'd built a network of believers, supporters, participants. I turned slowly in the quiet room, the weight of years sinking into my bones. Then, determination pressed up through the fear. If Evan had spent years building walls around me, then this was the moment I learned how to climb. I gathered every document I'd uncovered and spread them across the table like pieces of a puzzle. The forged signature, the false claims, the fake psychological evaluation, the loan, the bills, the screenshots. Patterns emerged, withdrawals increasing in moments when I'd been weakest, paperwork created when I was in medical distress, narratives shaped when no one else was looking. He had been preparing for this. A life where I was legally incompetent, where he controlled everything. When I reached for another envelope in his desk, my fingers brushed something thicker. A sealed folder addressed in his handwriting. Grace. Inside was a full psychological assessment declaring me unfit for independent decision-making. Signed by a doctor, stamped, detailed. Except the doctor's name belonged to someone who'd retired 5 years ago. I sat back, breath trembling. He had planned to erase me, but he had forgotten something important. I was still here. And now I finally understood exactly what I was fighting. By the next morning, the fear that had wrapped around my ribs had hardened into something sharper. Determination, maybe, or survival. I sat at my father's kitchen table with Evan's laptop in front of me, every document and screenshot I'd gathered the night before, arranged neatly like pieces of a case file. My skull throbbed with each heartbeat, but I pushed through the dizziness. I didn't have the luxury of resting. not when I finally knew how thoroughly Evan had been trying to erase me. I logged into our joint financial dashboard again, needing to see it with fresh eyes. The screen opened to a long list of transactions, and as I scrolled, I noticed something I'd missed. The withdrawals didn't start big. They were small, $40 here, $80 there, $120 at random intervals. Different amounts, different frequencies. All subtle enough never to draw suspicion, especially when Evan had taught me to avoid looking at statements because stress triggers your symptoms. But what twisted my stomach was the destination: Clear Path Outreach. I copied the name into a search bar. A minimalist website loaded, full of vague language about community initiatives and supporting long-term growth. No address, no staff names, just a donate button and a single email contact, a charity with nothing behind it. I dug deeper, pulling up state business filings. Clear Path Outreach had been registered 18 months earlier by someone with Evan's last name, Mitchell, but not his first. A shell entity, a non-profit created to look legitimate while funneling money somewhere else. My breath hitched. Evan didn't just steal the surgery fund, he'd been siphoning money long before that. I called the bank pretending I was preparing tax documents. The representative on the phone explained the withdrawals were approved with two-factor authentication, codes sent to Evan's phone only. When I asked if Clear Path Outreach was an IRS-verified nonprofit, she hesitated in a way that made my skin crawl. "I can't advise you directly," she said softly, "but charities with pending irregular review are often misused. Are you safe, Mrs. Mitchell?" That question hung in the air even after the call disconnected. I pushed away from the table, pacing the kitchen to steady the trembling in my hands. The more I studied the transactions, the more I realized they aligned with moments in my life when I'd been too sick to notice. After my collapse in the shower, after a fainting spell at work, after headaches that left me unable to get out of bed. The night I lay on the bathroom floor waiting for Evan to come back from running errands, a withdrawal of $600 hit the account. He hadn't been at the pharmacy like he told me. He'd been moving money. The cold realization settled over me. My medical decline had been convenient for him. My symptoms weren't just illnesses. He used them as windows. I collected the older paper statements Evan kept locked in a filing drawer and laid them across the table in chronological order. The pattern sharpened. Every time my symptoms worsened, the withdrawals grew more frequent. When I looked at the early months, before Clear Path Outreach existed, there were transfers to another unfamiliar account. It seemed this wasn't Evan's first attempt at hiding money, only his most polished. A fresh wave of nausea hit me. I returned to the credit report I'd accessed the day before. The personal loan, a large one, sat in the middle of the page like a bruise. I clicked into the loan details. The cosigner verification call had been completed, but the contact number listed wasn't mine or Evan's. When I searched it, the number's history led to a prepaid burner phone that was active for only a few weeks. But one line caught my eye. Previous call association, Mitchell office, reception. Reception, Evan's mother's workplace. I swallowed hard. She had denied involvement last night, claimed ignorance. Maybe she believed she was helping Evan protect me, or maybe she didn't care who got hurt. Either way, someone in that office helped him build this. My hands shook as I dialed her number again, but it went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. Instead, I scanned through the insurance portal again, trying to understand how many fabricated claims Evan had submitted. Procedures I never had, visits I never made. Some rejections were stamped suspicious documentation, yet no one ever contacted me. Evan must have intercepted everything. My chest tightened. If these claims made me look inconsistent or confused, it would strengthen any legal argument that I couldn't manage my life. Exactly what Evan needed for guardianship. I closed my eyes, forcing my breath even. I had to stay focused. I couldn't let my body fail before I understood the whole truth. Then my phone vibrated. A text from my father. "Call me when you can." Beneath it, a second notification caught my eye. the security camera alert from Evan's system. Someone had walked up to the door of my father's house during the night, a figure in a hood, lingering for nearly a full minute before walking away. My heart lurched as I scrubbed through the footage. The image wasn't clear, but the posture looked familiar. It wasn't Evan, but it wasn't a stranger either. I sat back, pulse hammering. Evan hadn't acted alone. Someone else was watching me, tracking me. Someone who wanted me intimidated, quiet, too overwhelmed to piece the truth together. A noise in the hallway startled me. My father poked his head in, eyes tired. "You're up early," he said gently. I nodded, swallowing. "Dad, did Evan ever bring someone with him when he visited you? A man you didn't know?" He frowned. "There was a guy once, tall, dark jacket. Said he was family, Curtis something. I didn't think much about it." Curtis. My cousin. The one Evan's mother mentioned. The one who worked with financial documents. The one who had always hovered around the edges of family gatherings with a smirk like he knew something no one else did. Everything inside me tilted. Curtis had been involved all along. I turned back to the laptop, staring at the transfers, the forged documents, the fraudulent claims, the burner phone number, the surveillance footage. Every thread connected now. Every line converged into a shape I hadn't been willing to see before. This wasn't a husband acting out of desperation. It was a coordinated effort to push me out of my own life. My heart pounded as I whispered to myself, almost afraid of hearing the truth aloud. They planned this. The words tasted like steel. My hands curled into fists. Then, another text. Unknown number. Stop digging. I stared at the message until the letters blurred. My skull throbbed, the pressure building again, but my resolve steadied. They wanted me blind. They wanted me confused. But I was finally awake, and I wasn't done digging, not even close. I stared at the name on Evan's travel itinerary until the letters blurred. Lana Brooks. I'd said it aloud a dozen times already, waiting for it to sound less absurd, less humiliating. But every time it felt like another crack splintering through the version of my life I thought I'd been living. I needed to understand who she was, why Evan had funneled money into a shell charity for 2 years, only to blow the last of my surgery fund on a luxury trip with her. I typed her name into social media, and the first thing that popped up was a perfectly curated influencer profile. Sunlit beaches, sponsored hotel stays, inspirational captions about resilience and chasing dreams. She looked like someone who lived in constant motion, always posing, always smiling. I scrolled further and found a post from 2 days ago. Manifesting a partnership that will finally take my brand global. Heart emojis, hashtags. But the language didn't sound romantic. It sounded like business. My anger softened into confusion. Why would Evan steal from his sick wife to go on a getaway with someone who saw him as an investor? I clicked through her videos. One caught my attention. Lana sitting in a sleek apartment, hair pulled into a tight ponytail, eyes shining with frustration. "People make promises," she said to the camera. "Big ones. And when they walk away, you're the one left dealing with the fallout, but I won't let anyone bury my work again." The video had thousands of views. The comments were sympathetic. But something about the bitterness in her voice made my stomach twist. I kept scrolling until I reached something that made the breath hitch in my chest. A comment from Lana on one of my old design posts. "Stunning work." A double heart emoji. She'd interacted with me 2 years ago. Before the affair, before the shell nonprofit, before my surgery fund started disappearing. My pulse quickened. Evan must have shown her my page. A cold realization crept up my spine. Lana had known I existed long before she became his mistress. Maybe she knew he was married from the start, maybe she didn't care, or maybe she thought I was already gone. Then I found something worse. A comment Lana had left under one of Evan's pictures months earlier. "She looks sweet. You're lucky to have someone so patient." The comment was deleted, but a cached version still existed. Had she meant it mockingly? Or had Evan spun some sob story about me being too fragile to function, the poor, unstable wife he was forced to care for? I set the phone down, breath sharp. If Lana believed I was mentally unstable, then Evan fed her the same narrative he fed everyone else. I dove deeper into Lana's business records. Her LLC had dissolved 2 years ago from unpaid taxes. A small claims suit showed she'd once accused a business partner of investment fraud. Her financial situation was fragile. She needed funding. She needed someone with money, someone like Evan who had access to my trust if guardianship happened. My chest tightened as a new possibility formed. Lana wasn't just a mistress. She was leverage. A notification buzzed. A new message request from a stranger. If he promised to invest in her brand, be careful. Lana attracts the wrong kind of men. I typed back immediately, "Who is this?" But before the message could deliver, the account vanished. I stood and paced, trying to quiet the storm building inside me. I needed more than breadcrumbs. I needed proof. I opened Evan's laptop again. This time I searched for synced conversations. I found a thread titled L Biz. The messages were worse than anything I'd imagined. Evan, I told you I'll get the funding. You have to be patient. Lana, you said the transfer would be done last month. I can't announce the partnership until it's real. Evan, don't push me. She's already suspicious. Lana, I don't want to be blamed for her condition. Evan, she won't be your problem soon. I'll handle it. My hands shook so violently I had to steady them against the table. The last message in the thread was a draft Evan never sent. Grace suspects something. Leave town if I tell you. I tasted bile. He wasn't just leaving me. He wasn't just cheating. He wasn't just stealing. He was building a future where I didn't exist. Not emotionally, not legally, maybe not even physically. But then something shifted in the messages. Something unexpected. A series of frantic texts from Lana. Stop asking me to lie for you. You said her condition was declining. The doctor notes don't match your story. I didn't sign up for this. Don't contact me until you fix everything. She sounded terrified. Not manipulative. Not triumphant. Scared. I scrolled deeper and found a screenshot Lana had saved. An email she drafted to Evan. If you don't keep your promise, I'll expose everything. The email had never been sent. Was she threatening him? Or was she warning herself? Then something else caught my eye, Lana's blog, a long post about supporting women with chronic illness. She described symptoms nearly identical to mine. Dizziness, tunnel vision, cerebral pressure. All simplified, flattened into inspirational content. Evan must have told her everything. She turned my medical vulnerability into branding material. One line in particular froze the blood in my veins. Sometimes a woman has to remove her obstacles, human or otherwise, to reach her destiny. The date on the post was the same week Evan began withdrawing larger amounts from the surgery fund. A pulse of heat tore through me. Not pain this time, but fury. White-hot, steadying fury. These two people had woven my life into a narrative I didn't consent to, stolen my words, my illness, my stability. I closed the laptop slowly, every movement deliberate. You want a destiny, Lana? I whispered. Then you just stepped into mine. I drove to Aunt Meredith's house with the brass key burning a hole in my pocket, and a pressure behind my eyes that made the road shimmer. I hadn't told my father where I was going. I didn't want to worry him until I understood exactly what I was dealing with. Meredith lived in a quiet coastal neighborhood an hour away, the kind of place where the only sounds were wind chimes and gulls. When she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask a single question. She just stepped aside and said, "He finally did it, didn't he?" Her words cut through me. I hadn't even told her Evan was involved. We sat at her dining table, sunlight catching the dust in the air. She studied me for a moment, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick folder bound with a faded blue ribbon, the kind you only keep when waiting for the right moment. I hoped you'd never need this, she murmured, sliding it toward me. But your stepmother suspected something years ago. My breath caught. Suspected what? Meredith exhaled slowly. That someone might try to take advantage of you. Financially, legally, emotionally. She didn't know who, but she was cautious. When your neurological diagnosis came, the trust fund she created for you should have protected you completely. I blinked at her. Trust fund? She set up a medical protection trust after your father remarried, Meredith said gently. It covers emergencies, long-term care, and, yes, major surgeries. It was built specifically so you'd never have to rely on a spouse or partner for financial stability. She paused. The trust was activated the day your AVM diagnosis was confirmed. A cold wave washed over me. Activated? I never received anything. Meredith's expression darkened. She pulled out a letter stamped from years ago, a trust notification addressed to our old apartment. This was returned undeliverable. A second copy was apparently signed for. She pointed to the scribbled signature. My stomach lurched. It looked like Evan's handwriting. I stared at the page, a growing horror crawling up my spine. Evan hadn't just hidden money. He had hidden an entire safety net meant to save my life. I confronted him once, Meredith said quietly, adjusting her glasses. A few years after you married. He told me you were too fragile for complicated financial discussions, that you were anxious, easily overwhelmed. Her mouth tightened. That I should stop confusing you. My jaw clenched. The narrative again, the same script he'd fed to strangers, coworkers, doctors, family. I opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were trust documents, letters, and legal notes my stepmother had written. There were also screenshots of emails from nearly a decade ago, when Evan and I had just started dating. Emails between Evan and someone named C. Mitchell. My blood went cold. Meredith, I whispered, is C. Mitchell Curtis? Yes, she said softly. Your cousin. The room tilted for a second before I steadied myself, so it hadn't started with the affair, or with my diagnosis. Evan had been in contact with my cousin before we were even engaged, asking questions about future inheritance eligibility and spousal designation rights. My stepmother had written a note beneath one of the printed emails. Why is this man interested in Grace's eventual beneficiary status before they are even engaged? Something is wrong. I pressed my palms to my forehead, feeling the throb of pain pulse outward. He married me because of the trust. Partly, Meredith said, but you're kind and loyal, qualities that make a person vulnerable to manipulation. You would give everything for the people you love. Your stepmother feared someone might see that and exploit it. I flipped through more papers. A notebook filled with her stepmother's handwriting, documenting odd encounters and meetings she didn't tell anyone about. Notes like, he asked if chronic illness changes distribution terms, and he wants Grace dependent on him, danger. Then the most chilling entry of all, if he does not get what he wants from me, he will go through her. I closed the notebook, my breath shaking. Why didn't anyone tell me? I whispered. Your stepmother thought burdening you with suspicion would cause unnecessary stress, Meredith said, and the trust's rules required neutrality until activation. But when your diagnosis came, she tried to reach you. By then, Evan had already intercepted communication. We only realized the truth after her passing. My vision blurred, not with tears, those had dried days ago, but with the pounding ache of betrayal layered on betrayal. Meredith rose and opened a small cabinet. She returned with a brass key on a thin ribbon. She gave me this, she said, told me to give it to you only when the danger became real. I traced the initials carved into the metal, my stepmother's. She had known this moment would come. What's inside the box this opens? I asked. I don't know, Meredith admitted. She warned me that what's in there would hurt before it healed. But she said it would protect you. My fingers tightened around the key. I felt my world realigning around that one small object. And there's something else, Meredith added, lowering her voice. Your stepmother wasn't the only one worried. I received an anonymous message months ago. It said someone in your immediate circle was preparing to move against you. I didn't know what to do. You were already so isolated. Someone in my immediate circle, I repeated slowly. Evan, Curtis. And possibly one more, she said. Your stepmother believed a member of your father's side of the family had been waiting for an opportunity to access that trust. They just needed someone close to you to break down your defenses. My grip on the key tightened until the metal cut into my palm. Meredith reached across the table, covering my hand. Grace, this isn't your fault. People like them prey on the good-hearted. I met her gaze, feeling something inside me sharpen into steel. I'm done being prey, I said quietly. As I stood to leave, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You opened the box. You'll regret it. A second text followed. He's coming back sooner than you think. I slipped the brass key into my pocket, lifted my chin, and stepped toward the door. Good, I whispered. Let him come. I drove back to my father's house, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The brass key in my pocket felt heavier than metal. It felt like a truth I couldn't yet face. By the time I walked through the front door, the room spun just enough to remind me how thin the line was between pushing forward and collapsing. But I didn't have the luxury of slowing down. Not when every hour brought Evan closer to home. I called Cole Harmon before I even set my bag down. I didn't trust myself to explain over voicemail, so when he answered on the second ring, I let the words tumble out. Clear path. Outreach, forged evaluations, fake nonprofits, intercepted trust notices, Curtis's involvement, burner phones, my stepmother's warnings. He let me speak until I ran out of breath. Grace, he said quietly, this isn't just fraud. It's a coordinated attempt to remove your legal autonomy. I'm coming over. His voice was steady, grounding. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like someone was going to help me pull the pieces together. He arrived within an hour. As soon as he stepped into the living room, he scanned the stacks of papers and the laptop on the table. Show me everything, he said. I did. He read quickly, eyebrows tightening with every forged signature, every fraudulent claim, every manipulative email. He didn't interrupt, not until he reached the fake psychological evaluation. This alone, he said, tapping the paper, is felony-level fraud, and if they used this to attempt guardianship, we're dealing with criminal conspiracy. The words made my skin prickle. Conspiracy, a scheme, a plan they built together. Evan's not smart enough to orchestrate all of this, Cole added. He had help, and not just from Curtis. He opened the insurance portal and pulled metadata from the document uploads. One entry stood out, an upload timestamp at 2:11 in the morning. Evan had claimed he was staying late at the office, helping a colleague that night. Now I knew what he was really doing. Cole snapped photos of every document and sent them to a contact in his firm. The more we uncover, he said, the more this looks like a guardianship grab. We need to get ahead of this legally before he files anything. The room tilted slightly, and I held the back of a chair to steady myself. Sit, Cole said. You're not collapsing on my watch. I sank down as he called someone named Harper, a forensic accountant he trusted with high-level investigations. Within minutes, Harper arrived, a compact woman with sharp eyes who moved like she was dissecting the room just by existing in it. She sifted through the Clear Path outreach documents with clinical precision. This isn't a charity, she said flatly. It's a laundering structure. Money comes in, gets broken into smaller amounts, then rerouted. See here? Blue Meridian Consulting. She tapped her nail on a line of text. That's a shell inside a shell. Do you recognize the beneficiary? She asked. I leaned closer. My breath caught. Curtis Mitchell. It all connected. My cousin, the burner phone, the conversations he had with Evan before the wedding. He wasn't just helping. He was expecting a payout. Harper added, There's a third transfer scheduled for tomorrow morning. If we don't freeze the accounts, your cousin drains everything. Everything. My stomach twisted. They were planning to empty the remaining shells before Evan even landed. Just then, my father walked in from the hallway, concern etched deep into his face. "Grace? Is everything all right?" I swallowed hard. "Dad, did you ever sign anything Evan brought you? Anything about me?" His brows pulled together. "He gave me some papers a while ago, said it was just information about your insurance. I didn't sign anything." "But you met someone with him," I pressed. "A man." Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Yes, he said the man was family, Curtis." The pressure behind my forehead pulsed harder. Curtis had been there from the start, watching, waiting, helping Evan build the lie. A sudden buzz from my phone sliced the silence. Another alert from the home security system. I pulled up the footage and felt my chest constrict. The same dark sedan that had been outside the night before was back. Parked across the street, lights off, engine running. Cole stepped behind me. "Whoever that is, they're monitoring you, and not subtly." My father's face drained of color. "We need to call the police." "We will," Cole said. "But first we gather everything. Grace, pack a bag. You're staying somewhere else tonight." As I went to my room, a folded slip of paper slid from under the front door. Cole reached it first and opened it carefully with 2 fingers. 4 words, written in a rushed hand. "Stop before you're hurt." My breath caught. It was the same handwriting Meredith had received months ago. Cole's jaw tightened. "They're watching. They know you're digging. That means we accelerate." We returned to the living room and spread the documents in strategic order. Harper organized financial evidence. Cole assembled the legal files. My father stood guard near the window, glancing out every few minutes to make sure the sedan hadn't moved. "We'll file for an emergency injunction tomorrow," Cole said. "We need to freeze assets before Curtis drains them. And before Evan files anything with the court." My pulse hammered in my ears. "He was planning guardianship. He wanted full legal control over me." Cole nodded grimly. "But now we know, and now we build the case to stop him." He paused when his phone rang. An unknown number. He answered, putting it on speaker. A distorted voice crackled through the line. "She needs to stop. Evan won't let her ruin anything." The line went dead. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Cole looked at me, calm but resolute. "Grace, this isn't just betrayal. It's a coordinated takeover. But they underestimated you." I lifted my chin, feeling something fierce settle inside me. "They're about to find out," I said, "that I'm not someone who disappears quietly." I barely slept, and by morning my body felt like it had been carved hollow. But I wouldn't slow down now, not when the brass key in my pocket had become the single point around which everything else revolved. Cole insisted we retrieve the safe deposit box contents before Evan returned. Harper agreed, warning that once he realized the conspiracy was unraveling, he or Curtis might move to destroy whatever evidence my stepmother left behind. My father insisted on coming. "You're not going anywhere alone," he said, and for once I didn't argue. We drove in silence, the air in the car thick with unspoken fear and determination. As we pulled into the bank parking lot, I noticed a dark sedan idling across the street. The same one that had been outside the house. A figure sat behind the tinted window, unmoving. "He's still watching," I murmured. Cole glanced over. "Good, let him watch. We're not backing down." Inside, the bank manager verified my identity, then escorted us into the vault. The metallic smell hit me the moment we stepped inside. Cold air, concrete walls, a sense of gravity that settled into my bones as he slid open the long drawer containing my stepmother's box. My hands shook as I fitted the brass key into the lock. For a moment I hesitated, feeling my pulse echo behind my eyes. Then I turned the key. The click was soft, almost gentle, but the weight of it spread through me like a shock. Inside the box lay a USB drive, a stack of sealed envelopes, a leather-bound notebook with a worn spine, and several legal documents tied with ribbon. Resting on top was a note in my stepmother's handwriting. "Grace, What you don't know can hurt you. Start with the video. My throat tightened. We moved into a private room where Cole plugged the USB into his laptop. A video loaded, slightly grainy but unmistakably her. My stepmother, sitting in the sunroom of our old house, her face tired but warm. "Grace," she began, "if you're watching this, then the danger I feared has reached you." My heart thudded. "I created the trust to protect you, not only because of your medical vulnerabilities," she continued, "but because someone in our extended family has a history of targeting inheritance assets. I received threats, unmarked letters. I didn't want to frighten you at the time." She paused, swallowing tightly. "There is a man who approached me once, asking questions about your future eligibility. He will come for you next, and he will not come alone." The video glitched, then cut to black. I pressed my fingertips to my lips, fighting the tremor in my shoulders. My father stared at the screen in stunned silence. Cole didn't speak, just reached for the next item, the leather notebook. I opened it. Every page contained dated entries, written in steady, meticulous handwriting. Notes about meetings, strange phone calls, questions someone had asked her about my finances. But one detail made my blood run cold. She had written EM beside several entries, months before I even met Evan. My father exhaled sharply. She knew he was trouble even then. I wasn't sure if Evan had been recruited or manipulated or willingly complicit from the start, but the implication was clear. My relationship had begun under false pretenses orchestrated by someone else. Inside the sealed envelopes were copies of trust filings, letters exchanged between attorneys, and black and white surveillance-style photos showing my stepmother speaking with a man I vaguely remembered from childhood holidays. Curtis's father's brother. Part of the Mitchell side. Harper leaned over my shoulder. "That's Charles," she whispered. "He's been involved in multiple financial disputes, some questionable." My stepmother's handwriting on a sticky note read, "Do not trust him. He wants control, not unity." My stomach twisted as the pieces continued locking into place. Cole unfolded one of the legal documents, an affidavit confirming that Evan had attempted to request beneficiary rights over the trust. Another letter showed Evan mailing a form impersonating me, claiming I wanted to relinquish control due to mental strain. He had forged an identity of me so carefully it could have passed as truth. Then Cole lifted a final packet of papers, documents outlining a meeting scheduled between Evan and Charles 1 week after our wedding. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. The dizziness from my AVM flared hot and sharp behind my eyes. I gripped the edge of the table. They planned this for years. My father put a trembling hand on my shoulder. "Grace, I'm so sorry. I didn't see it. I should have seen it." I shook my head. "He fooled everyone." At the bottom of the pile was a small envelope marked in my stepmother's handwriting. "Open last." My breath caught as I tore it open. Inside was a letter addressed to me, ink slightly smudged as if written in pain. "Grace, there will be a moment when the man you love becomes the greatest threat to your safety. When that moment comes, remember who you were before him. Your power lies in the truth he cannot rewrite." I closed my eyes as the words sank in. This wasn't just a warning. It was a lifeline from someone who had seen the storm forming long before I stepped into it. We packed the items carefully. As we left the vault and stepped back into the sunlight, the sedan across the street was still there, watching, waiting. My phone buzzed. "You opened the box. You've made a mistake." Another message followed. "He's coming back sooner than you think." I slipped the key into my jacket and straightened. If they thought fear would stop me, they didn't understand who I was anymore. The headache hit like a hammer the moment I walked back into my father's house. A sharp burst of pressure shot through the right side of my skull, bright and hot, and I had to grab the wall to stay upright. My vision tunneled for a second, the floor tilting under my feet. My father rushed toward me, panic rising in his voice, but I held up a hand. I needed a moment. Just one breath. When the wave finally eased, I sank onto the edge of the couch, trembling. The brass key in my pocket felt heavier than ever, almost radioactive. Everything inside me screamed that I was getting too close to the truth, close enough that the people who'd built this conspiracy were starting to panic. "Grace, you need to go to the hospital," my father said, kneeling in front of me. "I will," I whispered. "After I talk to Rowan. I need to know how much time I actually have." Cole agreed to drive me. At the clinic, I explained the worsening symptoms: pressure spikes, sudden dizziness, flashes in my peripheral vision. Dr. Rowan listened, concern deepening in every line of his face. After examining me, he folded his hands, his voice grave. "You're entering a dangerous stage," he said. "Your AVM is putting more strain on the vessels. You need surgery within the next few weeks, possibly sooner." My throat tightened. "I can't afford to wait. But the money, we will figure it out," he said quickly. "Hospitals have emergency grants, payment structures. We'll make sure you get the care you need." He stepped out to print information, but his voice carried as he spoke to a nurse behind the curtain. "She's declining. If she waits too long, the outcome won't be good." The words hit me harder than the headache ever had. Back at my father's house, the afternoon sun felt cruelly warm against my skin. He helped me inside, insisting I lie down, but I couldn't. The moment my head touched the pillow, I saw Evan's signature on forged documents, Curtis's name on shell companies, my stepmother's warning, "He will not come alone." I sat up with a sharp inhale. "Dad," I said quietly, "why did you trust Evan so much?" He sank into the chair beside the bed, rubbing his face. He seemed steady, mature. He said he loved you. And after your injury, I thought you needed someone dependable. My chest ached for reasons that had nothing to do with my AVM. He hesitated. "Evan came to me once. He said you were struggling to manage your finances, that you were having episodes." He swallowed. "He asked me to sign something saying you needed oversight. I refused. But Grace, he brought someone with him, a man, said he was family." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Did you get a name?" "I only remember the initial, C. Curtis, the same man who helped Evan fabricate my instability, the same man my stepmother feared." I forced myself to stand and asked my father to help me find the box of belongings he'd kept from my stepmother's final years. In the attic, dust floated in the air like tired ghosts. My father lifted out a small box that once belonged to her. Inside was a phone wrapped in tissue paper. My hands shook as I powered it on. Only one audio file remained. The label read, "For Grace." I pressed play. My stepmother's voice filled the room, steady but trembling at the edges. "Grace, if you're hearing this, something is happening. Someone has been pressing me about the trust. Someone who does not want you independent." A shaky breath. "He asked if your injury affected your decision-making. He suggested your future spouse should have authority." Her voice cracked. "Please trust the women in your life. Don't let the men who covet control shape your story." The audio ended with a whisper so faint I almost missed it. "If your health becomes part of their plan, run." I sat there in silence, the weight of her words settling into my bones. She had seen this long before I could have imagined it. A door closed downstairs. Jessica's voice filled the hallway. "Grace, are you home?" She found me sitting on the attic floor, my face pale. She knelt beside me immediately. "I came as soon as I heard your voicemail. Grace, what's happening?" I didn't know where to begin, so I handed her the phone. She listened, her eyes widening, anger blooming in her face. "That bastard," she whispered. "You won't believe this. Weeks ago, I saw Evan and Lana at the private airport, and he wasn't hiding it. He was bragging to someone that he'd finally fixed the Grace problem." My stomach lurched. "Fixed?" Jessica nodded. "And he had a folder. The label said guardianship petition." The walls felt like they were closing in. Evan didn't just want my money. He wanted legal control over my life. He wanted to define me as incompetent so he could take everything. I pressed my hands to my eyes, fighting tears. Not of sadness, but fury so sharp it felt like clarity. Jessica wrapped an arm around me. "You're not facing this alone. We're taking this apart piece by piece." Later that evening, Cole returned with updates. "I found inconsistencies in every filing connected to Evan," he said. "The forged psychological evaluation used a retired doctor's credentials. That's a felony." And Harper traced another shell company, Blue Meridian Consulting, to Curtis Mitchell. My jaw clenched. He was laundering through my cousin. "Yes," Cole said. "And someone used that same burner phone number, the one linked to Curtis, to attempt access to your trust account." The room fell silent. Curtis wasn't just helping Evan, he was part of the architecture. Cole exhaled. "We need to move now. An emergency injunction can freeze all accounts. And tomorrow, when Evan gets off that plane, he won't be the one cornering you. You'll be standing with a legal arsenal waiting for him." The anger rising in my chest sharpened into something steadier, colder, cleaner. Not rage, resolve. I walked out onto the porch, the night air cool against my skin. For the first time in days, I felt my breath deepen, no longer shallow with fear. My phone buzzed. "Unknown number. He flies back tomorrow. Be ready." Then another message from the same number. "You're not the only one preparing." I closed the phone slowly, lifting my chin toward the dark horizon. "They wanted me helpless," I whispered. "Instead, they woke me up." I woke before sunrise, with the sickening realization that today was the last full day before Evan returned. And whatever he had planned, whatever he thought he could finalize, was already in motion. My head throbbed in a slow, steady rhythm. I pushed myself upright, breathing through the dizziness. I didn't have time to be fragile. Not now. The dining table was still covered in files and screenshots from last night. I began sorting everything into labeled folders, the way Cole had shown me: fraud, shell accounts, guardianship, medical manipulation. Every page felt heavier than the last, as if the truth itself carried weight. My father hovered nearby, pretending to read the news, but I could feel his eyes flicking toward me every few seconds. My phone buzzed with a message from Cole. "Flight moved up by 12 hours. New arrival time, tomorrow morning." My stomach tightened. Someone had changed the booking. Someone who didn't want Evan in the air too long. Someone who wanted him home fast. I logged into Evan's travel account from his laptop. The updated itinerary was already there. 2 first-class seats, Lana's name still listed. But something else caught my eye. The payment had gone through Clear Path Outreach's card again, the nonprofit he created to siphon my surgery fund. The activity log showed an added notation under Lana's booking: business materials, declared at check-in. Why would Lana need business materials for a secret vacation? Unless she was carrying documents, or evidence, or something she didn't trust Evan to handle. I clicked into Lana's social media. Her close friends story lit up. Using a dummy account Harper helped me create, I tapped in. The video showed Lana in an airport bathroom wiping mascara streaks from her cheeks. Her voice shook. "I'm not doing this anymore, Evan. You lied about everything." She sniffed. "I just want to go home." My heart pounded. Fear, maybe, or opportunity. She wasn't loyal, she was scared. Cole and Harper arrived just as I replayed the video. Cole set his briefcase on the table. Harper opened her laptop instantly. "We found the link," Harper said. "Clear Path Outreach made multiple transfers to a secondary entity." She turned the screen toward me. The words hit like a punch. Blue Meridian Consulting beneficiary, Curtis Mitchell, my cousin. "He wasn't just helping Evan," Harper said. "He was preparing to drain the remaining funds through a separate channel, and there's another transfer scheduled for tomorrow morning. If we don't freeze it, he walks away with everything." My father sank into a chair, stunned. "Curtis, why would he do this?" Because he thinks he's entitled, I whispered. And because Evan promised him access. Before anyone could speak again, Jessica called. Her voice was breathless. Grace, I'm near the private airport. I just saw Curtis. He's pacing by the drop-off lane, yelling into his phone. What was he saying? He said, if she opens her mouth, we're all screwed. Grace, he was talking about Lana. He's afraid she'll talk. That meant Lana wasn't just scared. She held information that could destroy them. Then Jessica sent a photo. Blurry, zoomed in, but unmistakable. Curtis holding a thick file folder. The same brand Evan used for the guardianship documents. A cold pulse moved through me. My phone buzzed again. Another alert from the security cameras, this time footage outside Harper's office. The same sedan, the same shadowed figure. They're tracking all of us, Cole muttered. Outside, through the kitchen window, I saw that same car parked halfway down the street. Whoever was inside wasn't trying to hide anymore. We need to move, Cole said. Tonight, finalize evidence, coordinate with law enforcement, and prepare for the confrontation tomorrow. As he spoke, my phone chimed again, an email from Lana's business account. The subject line was blank. The body contained just 2 words. Please help. I stared at it, pulse racing. Cole read over my shoulder. She may be bait, he warned. Or she may be terrified, I answered. Either way, I need to know. I typed back, what are you afraid of? Her response came within minutes. You don't understand. He promised me it wouldn't hurt you. He said you were already too sick. He said you wouldn't survive surgery anyway. My breath hitched. Evan had used my illness as leverage, as justification. Another message. Curtis threatened me. If I don't cooperate, he'll make sure I lose everything. I have proof. I'll meet you after we land. Please don't let him find me first. Harper closed her laptop. We'll protect her. She might be the missing link. Cole began organizing the plan. Tomorrow, he said, we divide positions. Police will be ready. You won't confront Evan alone. And if Lana truly brings evidence, we'll have more than enough leverage. My father touched my shoulder, his voice rough. Grace, are you sure you can handle this? You're in no condition. I don't have a choice, I said quietly. They want me silent before surgery. I can't let them succeed. Night fell slowly, heavy as a curtain. We worked until my eyes burned from reading, until my fingers ached from typing and organizing files. Finally, everything was ready. Everything except me. I stepped outside for air, the cold breeze cutting through the heat simmering inside me. Tomorrow I would see Evan face to face for the first time since he told me I was better off dead. Tomorrow I would confront the man who stole my future and handed it to a woman who barely knew me. Tomorrow I would step into the airport, not as his wife, not as his victim, but as the one person he never expected to fight back. My phone rang, a blocked number. When I answered, a distorted voice said, "He knows you'll be there tomorrow." Before I could respond, another voice chimed in, one that froze every muscle in my body. "Curtis, come alone, Grace, or someone won't make it off that plane." The call ended. I stared into the quiet night, my breath slow, steady. "They think fear will stop me," I whispered. "Tomorrow they learn what real fear feels like." I woke before dawn, heart pounding, as if my body already knew today would change everything. My head pulsed with a dull, rhythmic ache, but I forced myself into motion. Evan's flight had been moved up. He would be landing in a matter of hours. By the time Cole arrived with a stack of freshly printed documents and a grim expression, I was already dressed, hair pulled back, hands steady despite everything trembling inside me. Harper followed him in carrying a case full of financial evidence, transaction logs, timelines, shell company diagrams, proof of forged signatures. My father insisted on joining us, refusing to let me face any of this alone. When we pulled into the airport parking garage, the morning was still gray and cool, the kind of quiet that felt like air holding its breath. Before we stepped inside, my phone buzzed with a message from Lana. "He thinks I'm still on his side." "Don't trust anything he says. I'll come to you when it's safe. I stared at the words for a moment, unsure whether they comforted or terrified me. Inside the terminal, Cole assigned positions. He and I waited in the arrivals hall. Harper sat up at a higher level, near the balcony overlooking the gates, camera ready. My father stayed near the security checkpoint with our police contact, Officer Ramirez, who was prepared to intervene the moment we signaled. Cole refreshed the flight tracker again. "Landed 20 minutes ago," he murmured, "but no passengers yet." "They're delayed," I said, though the unease in my chest told me that wasn't the whole truth. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. Not Evan. Curtis. He stepped off the jet bridge alone, in a crisp suit that looked slept in, holding a phone pressed to his ear and wearing an expression of pure fury. He scanned the crowd with sharp, predatory eyes. I ducked behind a column. Cole shifted to block me from view. Curtis's voice carried as he stalked through the terminal. "He better fix this. I'm not taking the fall. I swear if she opens her mouth..." He cut himself off abruptly, eyes zeroing in on a woman with blonde hair near baggage claim. He strode toward her, jaw clenched. But it wasn't Lana. He was guessing, searching, panicking. Cole mouthed, "He's losing control." My pulse hammered. A cluster of passengers pushed through the doors. And then I saw her, Lana Brooks. No glamour, no camera-ready confidence. Her hair was pulled into a messy knot, sunglasses hiding her eyes, shoulders hunched as if bracing for impact. She clutched a small hard case to her chest like it contained her heartbeat. She glanced around nervously, but not at Evan, at Curtis. The moment her gaze brushed mine, her breath hitched. She turned away instantly, pretending not to see me, then typed something on her phone as she quickened her pace toward the restrooms. My phone buzzed. "Family Lounge, now." Before I could reply, Curtis started moving in the same direction. I grabbed Cole's arm. "He's following her." Cole nodded once. "Go. I'll track Evan." I hurried toward the elevators, my body screaming with each step. Halfway there, the doors slid open and Curtis stepped inside, glaring when he spotted me. The elevator began closing before I could reach it. My heart seized, until a hand shot out and stopped the doors. My father. "Going up?" he said coldly, stepping inside to block Curtis. Curtis's jaw tightened, but he forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good to see you, sir." The doors closed. I took the next elevator. The family lounge was quiet, the kind of room built to soothe crying children and exhausted parents. Lana sat in a corner, knees drawn up, clutching the hard case like it contained her salvation. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know," she whispered before I could speak. "He told me you were refusing treatment, that you were unstable. I swear I didn't know the truth until yesterday." I stayed still, giving her space to talk. "He promised to invest in my company, said he'd free up family funds. But then Curtis got involved, and everything got darker. He told Evan to push the guardianship papers. He said you were sick enough that no one would question it." Her voice cracked. "I didn't know it was your surgery money. I didn't know you were fighting for time." "What's in the case?" I asked. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a flash drive labeled Guardian Transfer, Phase 2, along with a stack of emails between Evan and Charles, my uncle, discussing timelines and payout schedules. "He said once the guardianship was signed, I'd get my investment," Lana whispered. "I wanted out. They threatened me." The lounge door slammed against the wall. Curtis stormed in, face contorted with rage. "Give me the case, Lana." She recoiled, pressing into the corner. I stepped between them, despite the dizziness clawing up the back of my neck. "Touch her," I said, "and every shred of evidence you've hidden becomes public before you make it to baggage claim." He sneered. "You're in no condition to threaten?" Officer Ramirez and 2 airport police appeared in the doorway. Curtis froze. "You're coming with us," Ramirez said. Curtis reached for the case anyway. Lana screamed. I stumbled back. Ramirez lunged. In seconds, Curtis was pinned to the wall, wrists in cuffs, shouting that he'd been set up. It didn't matter anymore. As they dragged him out, my phone rang. Harper. Grace, she whispered. Evan didn't leave through arrivals. My blood ran cold. Where is he? He used a restricted exit. He's still in the airport. He's meeting with an attorney in one of the private conference rooms. What attorney? I heard the name Charles. She paused. Your uncle. I felt the floor sway beneath me. Not from my AVM, not from fear, but from the sudden understanding that Evan wasn't running. He was finishing the plan. I hurried down the corridor with Cole toward the row of private rooms. Through the glass wall of one conference room, I saw Evan sitting across from a sharply dressed attorney, documents spread before him. My medical records, the forged evaluation, the guardianship petition. The attorney pointed to a signature line. Evan leaned in with a pen. I stepped into view. Evan lifted his head. For a beat, he didn't seem to recognize me. Then his face twisted. Shock, fury, calculation. He mouthed 3 words through the glass. You weren't supposed to make it this far. My pulse went steady, cold, certain. He had come to the airport to take everything from me. He had no idea I was about to take everything from him. Evan's face was still twisted in that ugly mix of fury and surprise when the conference room door swung open. Cole stepped past me first, his voice calm but edged with steel as he flashed his credentials to the attorney seated beside Evan. The man stiffened immediately. He knew exactly what this confrontation meant. The attorney rose halfway from his chair. This is a private legal meeting. No, Cole cut in. It's part of an active investigation now. I stood in the doorway, my pulse rattling against my ribs, my head pounding, but my resolve solid. Evan looked at me like I was a ghost, someone he'd already buried. You shouldn't be here, he snapped. You're not well. You shouldn't be making legal decisions. I almost laughed. The irony was suffocating. And you shouldn't have forged documents saying I'm incompetent, I said, stepping farther into the room. The attorney's gaze snapped to Evan. Forged? Evan paled. They're not forged. I had to. Look, she's confused. She's been having episodes. Enough, Cole said. We know about the fake doctor, the false evaluation, and the shell nonprofits. And we know this meeting isn't about divorce or asset division. This is about guardianship. The attorney's expression tightened. His eyes flicked toward the folder on the table, the guardianship petition I'd only seen glimpses of before. He closed it slowly, fingers shaking. I'm not hired by him, he said finally, nodding toward Evan. My client is someone else. I felt the floor tilt slightly beneath me. Who? He hesitated. Charles Mitchell. My uncle. My breath left me in a slow, stunned exhale. Everything inside me seemed to rearrange itself in an instant. Every warning my stepmother left, every note, every video. The man lurking behind the curtain all this time wasn't Evan. It was Charles. Cole let out a low curse under his breath. The attorney continued, Mr. Mitchell retained me to prepare filings in anticipation of Evan being granted emergency guardianship. After that, Charles planned to petition as secondary guardian for financial oversight. Of my trust, I whispered, the words barely audible. The trust he pressured my stepmother about. The attorney didn't deny it. Evan jerked to his feet. You worked for Charles? You said you were here for me. The attorney gathered his papers with cold efficiency. I said no such thing. My role was to expedite filings. Whether you remained the primary guardian was irrelevant to my client. Everything in Evan's expression shattered. Pride, certainty, arrogance. For the first time, I saw fear flicker through his eyes. You set me up, he hissed at the attorney. You and Charles— No, I said. You set yourself up when you decided my life was worth less than your debts and her business plans. He whirled toward me. Grace, listen, I can explain. He pointed blindly toward the hallway where Lana had been taken for questioning. She pressured me. Curtis pressured me. My uncle promised you money if you destroyed my autonomy, I said. If you made me legally disappear. He flinched like the words burned. Behind us, Officer Ramirez entered the room with 2 federal investigators. The moment they saw the guardianship documents spread across the table, their faces hardened. "We'll need all of this," one of them said. Evan backed away. "Wait, I didn't file anything yet. I didn't do anything illegal." "You forged medical reports," the investigator replied. "You stole from a protected medical fund. You transferred assets through shell nonprofits and attempted to gain guardianship under false pretenses." "That's not a misunderstanding," Ramirez added. "That's fraud and conspiracy." Evan lunged toward the door as if he could outrun reality, but Ramirez blocked him easily. Before he could try again, the investigator snapped cuffs around his wrists. "You don't understand," Evan shouted at me. "Charles orchestrated everything. I only did what he told me. He said you wouldn't survive long. He said—" "I know what he said," I whispered. "I saw the documents." The investigators led him out of the room, still shouting, still blaming anyone but himself. His voice faded down the hallway, swallowed by the echoing walls. But the danger wasn't gone. "Charles is still out there," Cole said quietly. "We've exposed Evan and Curtis. But Charles has money, influence, and lawyers stacked to the ceiling. He won't go down easily." As if summoned by the words, Officer Ramirez approached. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, "there's someone outside asking for you. He says you'll know him." My stomach dropped. Cole and I exchanged a look. He nodded once, slowly, bracing himself. We walked together. We stepped out of the private terminal wing into the crisp afternoon air. The wind whipped across the curbside pickup area, scattering leaves and loose papers. And there he was. Charles Mitchell stood beside a sleek black sedan, arms crossed, expression calm. Too calm. Like a man greeting an old friend rather than watching the collapse of the scheme he'd engineered. "Grace," he said, smiling as though we were meeting for coffee. "You've grown more troublesome than I expected." My father appeared behind me, breath catching in his throat. "Charles," he whispered, "you?" Charles didn't even spare him a glance. His eyes were fixed on me alone. "You've made quite a spectacle today," he said. "Tearing apart years of planning. Do you feel satisfied?" I stepped forward, ignoring the pulsing ache in my skull. "I feel alive," I said, "which is more than you expected." Something flickered in his expression. Annoyance, maybe even anger. But it vanished quickly. "You always were sentimental," he said. "Your stepmother did you no favors with her softness. She should have understood that family legacy requires sacrifices." "Sacrifices," I repeated, "like stealing my autonomy, my trust, my life?" Charles sighed as if I were being unreasonable. "You were never equipped to manage that kind of responsibility. Evan understood that. Curtis understood that. I simply provided direction." I felt cold from the inside out. "You orchestrated everything." "Of course I did," he said. "And I'm disappointed you can't see how much easier your life could have been if you'd just allowed me to guide it." Cole stepped forward. "This conversation is over." Charles lifted his hand slightly, mockingly. "By all means. But don't think this ends here. Families have long memories, Grace." "This family," I said, "is done letting you define anything." Federal agents approached from behind us. Charles saw them, and his smile faltered. Not fully, but enough to reveal the crack beneath it. "Enjoy your temporary victory," he murmured, stepping into the sedan. "It won't last." As the door closed and the car pulled away under escort, the weight of everything hit me at once. The betrayal, the danger, the survival, the truth. Evan was gone. Curtis was caught. And Charles had finally stepped into the light. But the war wasn't over yet. Not until the last person who tried to erase me was held accountable. I pressed a hand to my chest, steadying my breath. "I lived long enough to expose you," I whispered to the retreating car. "And I'm not finished." Charles's car disappeared behind the line of federal vehicles, but I stood frozen on the curb, the cold wind cutting through my jacket as if to remind me I was still here, that despite everything designed to break me, I was still standing. My father touched my arm gently, but I barely felt it. All I could hear was Charles's voice echoing in my head. Families have long memories. Cole stepped closer. "Grace," he said softly. "This was the last piece. Now we bring the law to him." I nodded, though my pulse hammered hard enough to blur my vision. My AVM had been screaming at me all morning, but I'd refused to let it slow me down. Now that the adrenaline began to fade, the edges of my sight shimmered, reminding me how urgently I needed help. But first, justice. Over the next days, everything accelerated. Evan was charged with fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy, his attempts to claim he was misled falling apart under the weight of his signatures and emails. Curtis, cornered by his own panicked behavior at the airport, turned violent during questioning and was immediately charged as well. Their shared web of lies crumbled. But Charles, he didn't crumble. He denied everything until investigators pulled months of email correspondence from Lana's hard case and Evan's computer. He denied forging documents until handwriting experts confirmed his involvement. He denied knowledge of shell companies until Harper traced his fingerprints through financial trails he thought he'd buried. Eventually, denying became pointless. I didn't attend the initial hearings. I was in the hospital preparing for the one thing that mattered most, my surgery. Dr. Rowan greeted me with a tired but confident smile the morning they wheeled me in. "We'll take good care of you, Grace. You fought hard to make it here." I closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about Evan's schemes or signatures forged in my name. I was thinking about survival, about the woman who left a brass key and a message of warning, about the version of myself I was ready to reclaim. When I woke after the surgery, the world felt softer, quieter. Light filtered gently through the window. My father sat beside the bed, head lowered in exhausted relief. Jessica slept curled in a chair. Cole was outside the door, pacing as he took a call from the investigative team. The first thing I felt was gratitude, not that the surgery worked, though it had, but that I was surrounded by people who were still here. People who hadn't been part of anyone's plan but mine. A nurse brought me an envelope later that day. "This was delivered anonymously," she said. Inside was a note in my stepmother's handwriting, delicate, looping, unmistakably hers. "You are stronger than you know." I pressed the paper to my heart. The world after my surgery felt fundamentally different, lighter, sharper. I moved into a small apartment near the coast, windows thrown open each morning to let the salt air drift in. I rebuilt my routines, design work for clients who had been worried when I disappeared, daily walks once my strength returned, long conversations with my father about the years we'd lost to Evan's lies. Cole and Harper formed a task group with me, creating a resource hub for victims of financial abuse and medical coercion. The more I learned, the more I realized how many people had been targeted by the same tactics, how many had been isolated, silenced, undermined. Lana reached out too. Her message was cautious, heavy with shame. She agreed to testify against Charles and Evan, and though I couldn't forget the role she played, I found room in myself to forgive her. We weren't friends, but we were no longer enemies. She was rebuilding her life just as I was rebuilding mine. Months passed. Legal victories came slowly, but they came. Evan's plea deal fell apart once investigators uncovered the full extent of his laundering. He was sentenced. Curtis followed. And Charles, the man who'd orchestrated everything, was indicted on multiple felony counts related to fraud, undue influence, and trust manipulation. The trust my stepmother left was restored fully, and this time every safeguard was reinforced with layers Charles could never break. I visited her grave one afternoon, the sun low in the sky and the air thick with ocean mist. I placed the brass key beneath a small stone beside her name. "Thank you," I whispered. "You saved me long before I knew I needed saving." When I finally moved into my new apartment, a modest place painted in soft blues and whites, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: ownership of my own life. I opened the leather notebook my stepmother left, flipped to the final blank page, and wrote the first entry of my own. This time my story is mine. And it was. Not one shaped by a husband's lies or a cousin's greed or an uncle's schemes, mine. A few weeks later, a journalist reached out wanting to interview me, not for scandal, but for a piece raising awareness about financial abuse. I hesitated at first. Sharing my story again felt vulnerable. But then I thought about how many people had written to me privately, how many whispered messages came from those living in silent fear. I agreed on one condition: I controlled the narrative. And now, sitting at my desk with the window open and the sea breeze drifting in, I'll say this the same way I said it on camera. If you've ever been betrayed in a way that took your breath, your confidence, or your future, tell me your story. You're not alone. Sharing it might help someone else recognize the signs before it's too late. And if my story gave you even a moment of strength or clarity, stay with me. There are more stories of truth, survival, and justice ahead. Leave a comment, subscribe if you want to hear more, and remember, your voice matters even when someone tries to silence it. Especially then.